going to start with, we're going to have very simple introductions because we want to get into conversation. And basically the introductions, after a couple more remarks, it's your name, your company, your title, and location, and one word or phrase to describe you or your client's diversity, equity, and inclusion culture. So first, I'd like to say that I have been working in the field of creating global partnerships for good since the 80s. I started out very young, and this time is so exciting for all of us. We are doing work that is so meaningful, that is both advancing our clients or our organizations' purpose, their values forward, their products, their services, their engagement with their colleagues and their communities. Today we have incredible experts and CXOs from around the globe, and we are from India all the way to the West Coast, to Canada, to the UK, a company representing Spain and such, and others. So we're going to have a great conversation. First, I would also like to say, what is the Purpose Collaborative? Because Carol Cohen Purpose is a consultancy. It's my third entrepreneurial venture in my career. But when I left Edelman 7 years ago, because I tried global in a big company and loved them, but I wanted to go back to the agility and the, dare I say, the direct ability to have a thought and get it done versus a lot of large bureaucracy, but bureaucracy is good sometimes. So I created the Purpose Collaborative, which I invited former colleagues and then new colleagues came in to create this network of amazing individuals with amazing capabilities, with a true dedication to purpose at the center of their organizations. And so it is the world's first network, the Purpose Collaborative. And what we do as an organization, because at Carol Cohen Purpose, we only have 8 full-time people versus my previous firm that had over 100 before Edelman. We create custom teams to truly dive deep and bring a tremendous amount of knowledge to clients' challenges. So I have my Purpose Collaborative, some of them today. We've got 43 members in the Purpose Collaborative now. And we've got, the ones today I think are some of my besties and my BFFs. So I'm thrilled that you have joined our conversation. So getting started, basically, the context for the conversation, and congratulations, the theme of the conference is purpose, profit, and peace. That is the highest level. We're going to talk today about how a culture that has diversity, equity, and inclusion at its center, and it has got incredible policies, programs, procedures, but really especially internally, as well as how they bring that externally to the world, how it is a high performance organization. And some really great numbers from Deloitte, and Deloitte's done a tremendous amount of work in this field. They say that organizations that have authentic DE&I commitments, they have a 2 times greater likelihood to meet or exceed their financial targets, a 6 times greater propensity for innovation, and an 8 times better just overall business outcomes. So this isn't just about wonderful policies. This is about truly having profit, as you say, Karen, as well as peace. And peace in this context is a calm, serene, supportive environment where everyone can bring themselves, their best selves to work, realize their potential and have extraordinary outcomes. So that's the context. So in that, I think we should get started. So I'm going to go around and I'm just going to pick people. Dave, you want to start and just, name, title, where you're from, and your one word or phrase about your culture.
Yeah. Yes, I'm Dave Bhattacharya. I work with the Aditya Birla Group, which is about a $60 billion multinational headquartered in India. And I look after several businesses, including renewables, media, etc. I've worked with this group for 27 years, and I've worked across the world, including Canada, UK, India, etc. And I've seen the challenge that I see is not the equity and inclusion efforts that we make within the group, which is very good and intense, and very effective. But the challenge that we see is in the ecosystem, which is 3 to 5 kilometers radius around the 70-odd locations that we have across the world, and especially in India. And we work on areas like healthcare, sanitation, education, livelihood. And I think that's where the maximum effort has to go, because the Gini index in India is pretty intensely high. And that challenge is continuous. And I would like to, and I personally work in the area of agriculture with about 40,000 farmers. And I see the amount of effort that is required to go the shortest distance. And that effort has to be intensified further if we want to achieve the SDG goals.
Super. Thank you so much. Okay, Deborah, you're on mute.
Good morning, good evening all. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Deborah Leipziger, and I advise companies all over the world. I've written a number of books in this space, and for me and my clients, I think one of the key areas is around inclusive hiring. This is one of the biggest challenges and opportunities, I think.
Great, super, thank you so much. John.
Hi, my name is John Gargani. I've been working with organizations to help them design, measure, and scale their impact for about 30 years. Former president of the American Evaluation Association. And I'm focused right now on helping organizations that are trying to create good in addition to making a profit, achieve those environmental and social missions. I think in terms of challenges, a lot of what I'm seeing is sort of also spreading the radius of where DEI gets considered. I mean, we focus a great deal on what's inside the organization, but I think integrating that with what's outside of the organization is a considerable challenge and very difficult for organizations to monitor and measure and keep track of. That's where I work. I think it's an exciting area and a place where potentially we can do a lot of good.
Super, thank you. Carrie, you're on mute. Get you off mute. Okay, go for it.
Hello all. Thank you, Carol, for having us. Thank you everyone for being with us today. My name is Carrie Fox. My pronouns are she, her. I am the founder and CEO of Mission Partners. We're a woman-owned benefit corporation, social impact consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. And our one word is accountable. As noted, we run a social impact communications firm. We use communications as a tool to advance justice and equity. And many times that means being the one at the table that is challenging and guiding leaders through and with a space of love to help folks along that journey of equity, knowing it's a lifelong process.
And thank you for bringing up the word love. I think we're going to hear that a few times today. Philip. Thank you, Carrie.
Great. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So my name is Phil Haid. I am the CEO and the founder of a social impact agency called Public. We're based in Toronto in Canada. We work all over Canada and the US. So delighted to get into this conversation. The one word that I would put forward, which is actually the core value of Public, which is courage. And it's the courage, and our purpose is to accelerate change in society. And so having that courage, the conversation we're going to have, this work is really difficult. And having the courage to have the real conversations, the courage to admit where you're falling down and where you're making mistakes, and the courage to actually take the steps to put into action your commitments and tie that to your compensation, which I'm sure we'll get into when you look at what companies are doing when they mean it, is something that we think a lot about, and we work hard to try to live every day.
Super, thank you. Elliot.
Hi all, my name is Elliot Kotek. I'm the founder of the Nation of Artists. We're based in Los Angeles. We are a non-fiction storytelling and impact agency out here, production company as well. Our purpose is defined as ideas plus empathy equals impact. We believe you can't have relevant impact without empathy, and you can't have empathy without diversity and inclusion.
Super, thank you so much. Lawrence.
Hi, thanks, Carol. I'm Lawrence Evans, the CEO of Reputation Leaders, and we're a global thought leadership and research consultancy. And I think my phrase would be think differently. So we help our clients challenge stereotypes around things like gender equality or racism or access to health and various other things. And by challenging stereotypes, we also help clients try and close what I call the say-do gap, the gap between what they commit to and what they actually do.
Thank you. Pia.
Hi, everybody. So I'm the founder and president of Okla Group. And similar to Lawrence, we specialize in global thought leadership and really deconstructing, understanding, analyzing, getting to the root cause of global issues like the future of healthcare, the future of work, CEO prognosis on the economy and workforce strategies. Our most relevant work to this discussion is predicated on a study of 1,100 organizations in 54 countries on diversity, equity, and inclusion from Mercer, which is the largest HR consultancy in the world. And I think there are a number of opportunities we're going to be discussing. The one I'm very interested in is understanding and deconstructing the issues based on data, getting a understanding of the internal labor market of a company to investigate the inflows and outflows of talent at each level, and to understand where the choke points are, where there's a precipitous exit of people, usually at the mid-management level, of women, of diverse populations, and getting to the root cause of those issues so that then plans and programs and systems can be put in place. But I think starting with the data and an accurate understanding is absolutely critical to then getting to solutions.
So John, you and John are going to become great new friends. Okay, Caleb.
Hello, everyone. So glad to be here. My name is Caleb Gardner. I'm one of the co-founders of a consulting company called 18 Coffees. We really focus on transformation and change, and often do work at the intersection of communications and social impact, which is a lot of our background. We care a lot about DEI as it relates to how it changes the organizations of the clients that we work with. We think that it shouldn't be just, set off out as a cost center out over here as something we do to make ourselves feel better, but it actually should be transformative to our clients' organizations. And we've been really lucky to work with clients in the US and globally who think that way. I think it's really important that we are thinking inclusively about not just what does it things like inclusion mean in the US, where we think about it one way, but we actually take a more globally inclusive perspective on it. And we've been lucky to work with some clients who, have a footprint in the US, but also have footprints all over the globe, and they need to think of broader perspective on that. So I'm really excited that we're having this conversation today.
Super, thank you. Balaji.
Thanks, Carol. Hi, everybody. My name is Balaji Ganapathy. I'm the Chief Social Responsibility Officer at Tata Consultancy Services. You're the second most valuable technology company, information technology company in the world, with over 600,000 employees in 50 countries and 153 nationalities. Our purpose is to build greater futures through innovation and collective knowledge. So when we think about it from a DEI perspective, the starting point is the community, because 150 plus years ago when the Tata Group was founded, the founder said that the community is not just another stakeholder, but the very purpose of existence of the business. So our starting point is how to build better nations, better communities. How can that then be reflected in the talent and the workforce we have within the organization? And then how can we work with our customers to create a more inclusive future for all through digital and using purpose as the new tech?
And I have to say that Balaji has coined that phrase, purpose is the new tech. And it's very, very powerful. So thank you for joining us. Adita.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eddie, and I am the Sustainable People Strategy Consultant at Love Your Mother. Our home base is Barcelona, Spain, but in reality, we are a distributed team of over 20 people residing in every corner of the globe imaginable. I have joined Love Your Mother, which started out as a branding and communications agency working with socially responsible businesses, as what Lawrence named the kind of talk and action gap. So my mission within Love Your Mother is actually holding our clients accountable to actually doing what they declare they're doing in their communications campaigns. So I'm a little bit of a guardian angel, making sure that organizations we work with actually walk the talk across sustainability goals that encompass environment as well as people sustainability goals, of which diversity, inclusion, and equity is a big part. And I think because we are an international team and we were conceived as a very diverse, culturally diverse team, we have diversity at the core of what we do and in our DNA, as it were. But working with clients, and we currently work with clients of many different sizes, from socially responsible business startups to large corporates. What we're trying to work, and that would be my word, is belonging. So we are trying to build for our clients a culture of belonging where people would feel safe and comfortable bringing their own selves to work, whatever that whatever shape or form that would take, and then work backwards into diversity and inclusion practices that would make that happen.
Super. Love belonging. We're going to get into that. Anavon, welcome. You can't hear us. We can't hear you yet. While he's trying to connect, I'd just like to give a shout out to Nicole Peroni. She's one of our valued colleagues at Carroll Cohn on Purpose, and she is really loving this conversation because she has a master's degree in organizational development. Hi, Nicole. Do you want to say hi? You're on mute. Say hi.
Hi, everyone. You're too sweet, Carol. It's great to be here. I saw my name up on screen there. I'm just a viewer, so I'm going to soak all this in today. Really
okay, super. Thank you so much. She's incredible. Okay. Anavon, how are we doing? Are we getting your audio? No? Why don't you log out and come back in, and then we can go to you.
All right.
Oh, no,
I was having...
You're working. Okay. Please share with us. You're incredible. You're exalted. So join us. Tell us about your background.
I'm Anirban. I currently head a Center for Sustainability at the Mahindra University. My immediate prior assignment was that of the Chief Sustainability Officer of the Mahindra Group. It's a federation of companies with a motley set of businesses, which includes the world's largest agriculture tractor company, as well as the pioneering EV company of India. There's a whole bunch of others, but we'll talk about them later. The purpose of the organization is to drive positive change to enable stakeholders to rise. As you can see, working on diversity, equity, and inclusion is an integral part of helping stakeholders to rise. I must confess, however, that the actions that get taken to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion has got intensified once there was greater awareness of the subject, and it was not dealt with tacitly by those of us who believed that we were always doing the right thing. I must also mention that when reflecting on diversity, equity, and inclusion amongst stakeholders we work with, especially the urban poor as well as the rural poor, and thinking about the kind of questions we discuss. I know that in these societies, sometimes they stare at us wondering, what is it you're actually talking about? Is this even for real? So I'm guessing that there is a long way to go for DEI to become mainstream, not just in urban India and amongst people like us, but amongst the less privileged, especially the urban poor and the rural poor.
Super. Thank you so much. Okay, is there anybody else that is not on screen? Because we only get 12 beautiful faces. Am I hearing someone? Oh, okay. So if not, we are going to jump in right to the conversation. So, and in a way, I'd like people to be as brief as you can, and you can challenge each other, you can build on each other. It's perfectly fine. And don't worry if you run over a little bit. I'll kind of like, I'll officiate. Okay, so why don't we just, I'd like to start with the first questions. How do you, some of you have, but how do you define diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization or with your clients? And obviously DE&I, DE&I, they're not all the same things. So how do you define it? Anybody, just jump right in.
Okay, I'm happy to jump in. I think the way we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion is inclusion without exception. So to get to inclusion, diversity is about improving representation among all aspects of when you're looking at it from within the organization, the workforce, right? So how do you improve representation? How do you ensure that people whom you're bringing in have a home, they stay, they're able to be nurtured and grow, they're able to foster relationships. So that is where it starts to move into more of inclusion. But in order for inclusion to really happen, equity is a key consideration in the culture that you set within the organization. Treating everybody equally is something that is not going to mend the challenges that we see in society, right? I often believe that we as organizations, we tend to work with consequences and not with causes, right? A lot of what we work on are the consequences of what has already occurred in society. And I think truly for organizations to be bold and address the real problems, we have to tackle more of the causes. And this is why people often talk about it, that you don't leave some part of you behind when you come to work. And especially in a hybrid mode, when you're working today, you could be working from anywhere and be part of a team and interact. So how do you address the causes of what causes the differences and the challenges that people face, addressing that? So I would just put it in a broad definition. So inclusion without exception is that the heavy lift falls on you as the organization. You have the resources, you have the thought leadership, you have the network, you have the people, you have the reach to communities, you have the reach to customers. How do you take the heavy lift on you to work on the causes, not just on the consequences?
Super, thank you. I love that. Inclusion without exception. Somebody else, jump in.
Carol, may I add to that?
Of course.
I think about everything that you just said resonates so deeply with me, because I think about DE&I and belonging and justice, all of the elements we are talking about today, as focused on a deep and radical sense of inclusion, belonging, and a shared commitment to use every decision we make in business as an opportunity to advance racial justice and equity. And I often think about our role, collective role here as business leaders and leaders generally, that every day we have a choice on if we care deeply about equity, we can make the decisions to advance equity. It's a privilege to even be having this conversation. And I think I just want to stay grounded in that while it can be very challenging and hard, it can also be a joyful opportunity to advance us as a society, as a global society.
Thank you. A joyful opportunity to advance us. Somebody else jump in. Thank you, Carrie.
One of the definitions that I love for equity is allowing people to prosper and to reach their full potential. And I think that is a key definition. It comes from the Corporate Racial Equity Alliance and their amazing work. And thank you, Carrie, for introducing justice into this as well.
Super. Somebody else.
I would say that the way we approach this with Love Your Mother and working with clients is also about expanding the different facets of diversity and including a wider array of lived experiences. So DEI is very often clustered together with gender equity, pay equity, racial inclusion, ethnic inclusion. Those are the things that most organizations think about in the first instance. We also try to look at more hidden lived experiences, like people who are carers, let's say neurodiversity and differently abled people with conditions that might not be visible. So really like a wider array of lived experiences beyond the textbook definition, if you like.
Great, super. Somebody else, jump in.
Carol, we talk a lot about enabling cultures where people can bring their authentic selves to work and to be seen, heard, and valued for who they authentically are, and so that there isn't a dissonance between who they are outside of the office and within. And so I think that's an important part of this, and for people we also look at it in terms of surface diversity and inner diversity, those more hidden aspects that may be brain dominance, values, experiences, exposures. So it's aspirational, but a view that people can bring their whole selves, their authentic selves to work and be appreciated and valued and gain advancement. And also, I think related to that is addressing, which is quite nefarious, but issues of unconscious bias, right? There's so much unconscious bias that people naturally bring, and it takes a good amount of training, self-awareness, consciousness, I think, to as an organization to look at issues of unconscious bias and start to route them out.
Great, thank you. Somebody else, because we're beginning to lean into, and I want to get to what Karen wants us to talk about, challenges, because we're talking about amazing organizations that are really embracing, loving, recognizing all different levels of diversity, people's diversity.
So yeah, I'd like to maybe build on that. You know, if we're thinking that our perspective on this is limited because of who we are and where we come from, then an alternative to us defining DEI would be having the people who are affected by it define it. And that'll be different in every context. And in every context, people will disagree on what that means. And part of our job will be trying to reconcile those differences. And for the kind of work I do, it almost always starts with understanding the perspective of people who are affected. What do they think a better world looks like? What do they think an improvement is? Not those who have the power to create the improvement. And I think that changes the power dynamic, where we become servants of others rather than those who are wise and can bring a certain knowledge to the folks we hope to help.
Super, John. I love the fact that you brought up the word servant, because there's a lot of discussion about servant leaders. Of course, certainly one of my favorite people in the world, besides biology, is Paul Pullman. And being a servant leader, I think we'll get into that as a way of addressing. I know, Carrie, you have tremendous love for that as well. Let's talk about challenges. What are the challenges? We've all discussed what the DE&I definition will be, but what are the challenges to making it work? And there are a lot.
I think one of the challenges is that to truly think of being inclusive with those that we work with is recognizing that their experience isn't bound by our office culture. There are things happening in their personal lives that we have to take into consideration. There are things happening in our community, in larger society. I don't think that we necessarily always have the leadership tools to be able to help them bring their quote unquote full selves to work, even though we've asked them that over and over again. We want to think about DEI in terms of insularity within our walls, but actually the lived experience of our employees is vastly different when they leave our organization. And that needs to be something that we reconcile on a policy level, on a political level, on all kinds of different like external leadership levels.
So I love you mentioned, Caleb, leadership tools. And so as we talk about challenges, if anybody can say, hey, here's a leadership tool. This is something that I have developed, learned about, utilized, because we not just want to have the high level talk, we also want to have solutions. But other challenges, and then we can talk about leadership tools.
Carol, can I build on something that Pierre said about being seen and heard? And I think it relates to what John said also. The work that we've done for clients around people with disabilities, one of the things they say is they just feel invisible. And most of the focus of DE&I, of course, is the things you can see. It's gender or it's race. But what about the things that are mental or cognitive, or the disabilities that are not particularly obvious? And those are the harder ones to deal with, because you have to look beneath the surface and really identify, well, what are some of those challenges? And actually some of the cultural differences are even some of them more challenging ones.
Very true.
And interesting, there's a lot of products that actually have been created for differently abled, you know, the Xbox controller from Microsoft or the Trio Razor from Gillette. But somebody else jump in, sorry.
I would jump into a different challenge, and this is probably, it plays on the diversity side of the equation, which is on hiring, you know, you can't go out to your traditional networks. And I think that one of the challenges is that if you're really committed and you really set goals around your targets, how do you get outside of your comfort zone? How do you get outside of, I think Caleb, you were sort of referencing this as well, a culture where you're sort of looking for people you think will fit within your culture. You have to sort of blow that idea up and say, if you're really committed because you believe it will drive for a better result for your company, better result for the world, you have to go outside. And sometimes you find you're faced with a moment where you're looking to hire for a certain role and you're not finding what you need. It's not because the talent isn't there, but it's because you have to go way outside of your existing network. So you have to work that much harder looking with, you know, talent searches, with people who specialize in, you know, in headhunting and such. You have to make that extra effort if you're really committed to it. And that is not easy, especially when you're a smaller organization and you're hard pressed to find the right talent at the right moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about open hiring later, but some other people jump in with challenges.
So, you know, if you were to acknowledge that it is possible to hire great people, but who may not be people like us, you would then face the next challenge, which is, are these communities participating in the workforce? Do you have enough people out there to hire? Is there a group of people who you can choose from? And even as we are, you know, taking the first steps towards increasing gender diversity within the organization in a country like India, it's a very real challenge because you don't always have a talent pool to hire from. A similar but a slightly more nuanced challenge exists with integrating people with special abilities into the organization. Actually, if you do not do it the right way, your organization could turn out to be a bit of a hellhole for people with special abilities. And to be able to create an ecosystem where you can not only welcome them but help them to thrive takes quite a job. And when I look at all my peers, I can't think of more than one or two organizations who've been able to do that at scale. On equity, I think the much, what should I say, appreciated, driven management practice of differentiating performance, recognizing performance, having a performance culture, to be able to have the best of that and to have a team which is focused on equity or equality. I don't know how the two of them can really live together very, very comfortably. So there has to be a third way where you obviously need to have colleagues and employees who perform, but at the same time, you've got to figure out a way which is far more egalitarian than where many performance-driven cultures take you to. So one for D, one for E, and one for I for you.
Super. Okay.
I agree with a lot of those points, Carol. I want to just bring in a perspective that ultimately I believe that the challenges are that people are intersectional, right? So you cannot build systems and tools and cultures saying that, okay, let me cater to women, let me cater to Black people, let me cater to Asians, cater to people from who have a certain disability. I think we have to look at the world in a very intersectional manner, and that is the challenge that we all face as leaders, because our own understanding of what does it take to live a life if you are intersectional has been upended with the last 2 years of both the COVID pandemic, the shift to hybrid work, which has placed very disproportionate expectations, especially among certain genders, and the advent of wars like the Ukraine war, which puts heightened pressure on certain populations as well. So, I mean, if you look at this cut of slice of time and then look at the challenges, the kind of intersectionality that will appear is, I would say, the biggest challenge to work. I agree that, yeah, we have to look more and like the communities that we live in. So including and creating pathways for them is important. I agree that within the workforce, how to improve representation, how to create more visible career paths, how to look at neurodiversity, those are important. And to a customer base also, how we can reflect. But I think the key to this is we need to get better at solving for intersectionality, understanding intersectionality.
Others, jump in. Carrie, you're shaking your head. Yeah, you're agreeing.
I am agreeing, and I'm thinking about how difficult it can be. This comes to one of the challenges, difficult it can be for the person or the people who are sitting in power, who are often, as we know, some of the data is changing, but often the least harmed or affected by the inequities. And so therefore, to face and understand and acknowledge those inequities to the point where we are able to completely reimagine a system can be very difficult. And I think one of the challenges is when we appoint a leader to be that DEIB leader, that person will fail if they are not fully supported by the leadership team.
Absolutely. Others, jump in. These are great points.
So I was thinking of saying that, I know that you all of you are specialists in your area. I'm kind of a little bit of an outsider in this. But I think within the organization, 150,000 people in my worldwide group, Aditya Birla Group, we are very privileged. The moment I step out of my office or go into one of the factories and step out of the factory, and then you find that, when you're setting up a new factory, for instance, and you want the local people to run your canteen, right? You train them to cook, train them to serve, and this, that, or the other. So you want the women folk to come and make the flatbreads, the rotis. The men folk, of course, won't let them come. So the question of their income, their empowerment, etc., is, you set it back by several months in trying to first convince the men folk that, you have to let them come and work, be useful, and it'll be much better than hanging around doing the farm work, for which in any case, for 4 months in a year or 6 months in a year, they're probably doing nothing much. So it is that kind of effort that needs to be made for inclusion. So I don't even know where to begin this discussion. And then when we teach these young girls on POSH training and things like that, you realize that when the girl is standing straight, you tell her to raise her hands, she can't raise her hands. She can't, there's a sense of insecurity that if you raise your hands, you can be violated. She can't raise her hands. You tell a girl to raise her hands that are high up, she can't raise it. That's the level of challenge that we face when we are working with rural women, rural girls, and urban poor. And I think that inclusion is where, the kind of things that we are trying to do in sort of livelihood and education and, social justice in the sort of hinterland of our factories. I think that challenge in India, unless the corporates take it on head on and include that as part of their SDG goals, I think this effort that we're making for our organizations, and I think we are so privileged. The women are paid as much as the men. Everything is taken care of. A woman wants to go home and have children. You can go for 2 years and come back. There's no problem. So all these are taken care of, 99%. But still, buildings are not, friendly enough for differently able people. You can't wheelchair into different buildings in the city. You want to get into a train, bus, it's impossible, right? So unless you have your own transport, you can get. So then the organization has to organize all of it, right? So when we include people in our workforce who are differently able, you have to see from A to Z, how can the person get to work and go back? So I'm saying the inclusion challenge in India is of a different level. And I think corporates have to step out if we want to do any of the 17 goals in SDG.
Yeah.
There has to be huge outreach that we have to do.
I'd love to, Balaji, I know that you do so much work with marginalized youth, especially with your training for digital skills. Maybe you can address what Dave's talking about a bit.
I'm completely empathetic to what Dave has shared. I think the world that we live in is very privileged. And, for example, last week I was in a remote village in Jharkhand, which is one of the marginalized places in India. and spending time with the villagers there. And when you talk about equity, we use fancy terminologies and great definitions. And when you ask them, okay, what do you really need? Knowing what you know today about the world around you, a little bit more than what you knew before, what do you need? What they're talking about is, basic education for kids, proper infrastructure like roads so that they can actually go and, and this place is just 3 hours away from civilization in a metro form. So, and then with the women, when we talked to them, what they said is, I don't want to do TEPA, which is basically using the fingerprint to identify yourself, but rather be able to read and write. So I think, the whole dimension of what we talk about from a community perspective changes the moment you immerse yourself in whom you're trying to serve. And then the realization dawns that the beauty there, Carol, thanks for pointing it out, because we often look at marginalized communities as having deficiency or something that is missing. But what they may be missing in terms of access to opportunity and privilege that we have, they have a lot more in abundance in terms of sense of community and boldness and aspirations to dream. So I think kindling that and giving that the space through concerted efforts, where you can provide basic literacy, which is what we are doing with 1 million people across the country and in India, and in the school systems, working in the school systems so that we can improve upon what is currently there. We're working with a few million students across the government schools and social welfare schools in India. And what we see again is that teachers have abundance of confidence. Kids have abundance of aspiration. If you put in front of them opportunities and clear pathways, then they have choice. And which is why the word to solve these problems I would use is empowerment. And empowerment is the process of gaining power and control over your own destiny. And that is the path that we can imagine for those who are marginalized, whether it is in India. And I see the same in inner city neighborhoods in downtown Manhattan or in rural America. I spent time in Australia earlier this year with the indigenous community. I think the key messages are the same when it comes to outside in view, right? We cannot view marginalization as a deficit. People have inherent potential. What we need to do is to look at empowering their journey and their pathway. And skills and opportunities are definitely a big part of that.
Super, thank you. Others to jump in, we're talking about, again, challenges, but beginning to talk about potential solutions, potential ideas. I'd also love to hear from you any brief stories that's happened in terms of any initiatives that you have been engaged in, because those profound stories really stick with us and they're great learning opportunities.
Yeah, Carol, I would love to chime in. We've had the privilege of interviewing, we're working with Paul Pullman at present, one of my clients. And as you may know, he's written a book called Net Positive with a fundamental belief that companies, and it sounds Tata is very much of this mindset, that companies and leaders have a fundamental opportunity to have a net positive impact on their sphere of influence. And so related to this and to the discussion that's being had, the criticality of setting measurable goals, which Julie was done so elegantly with the USLP. And with regards to this discussion, and I think this gets to opportunity, is what are your stated and measurable goals? How are you going to hold your management and leadership accountable? Where are you going to course correct when you don't meet those goals? So just ticking off a few, and you asked also for best practices, Unilever has by 2050 the goal of 5% of its workforce is going to be made up of people with different abilities. 2 billion annually will be spent with diverse businesses worldwide, and they are committed to equipping 10 million young people with essential skills to prepare them for job opportunities by 2030. And so what I love about this is the commitment to stated goals and then working through the complexities of that. But I think that just is just really important.
Super, thank you so much. Others, I know others wanted to jump in on this.
I would like to make a friendly amendment to that, if I may, which is, I like everything you just said, but I would suggest that we never use the term measurable, because what that suggests is that some things can't be measured. And when people begin to look at goals and say they must be measurable, they begin to move away from the goals that are actually meaningful to the ones that they imagine they can attach some kind of number or description to. And in my work, I mean, everything is measurable. I can measure anything that you're trying to accomplish. It's much more important for you to tell me what matters and for whom it matters. And then we can find ways to understand it. So that would be my friendly amendment. I love everything you said. Just let's not use the word measurable. Let's use meaningful.
Pia, you want to respond?
I think it's both and. I think you've got to have the targets and the goals and to hold people accountable and hardwire them into the KPIs of leadership. So I think it's both and.
Yeah, it's modeling behavior. Absolutely, that servant leadership that I talked about, for sure. John?
Yeah, just to clarify, I'm not saying you don't measure things. I'm simply saying that the ability to measure something is universal. You can measure anything. So rather than defining the goal as something that should be measurable, define what is meaningful and why it's meaningful and for whom. And from that, you can find a way to measure it.
Yeah, meaningful and measurable. Okay, others, and
it's always measurable.
I'd love some, again, mini stories of your experience in your organizations, how you've addressed a challenge in DE&I with perhaps an amazing solution.
Carol, I'd like to share some change that I've noticed.
Okay, and then Carol will go next. Yeah.
You know, work has been taking me to Indian villages over the last 25 odd years. And I can empathize and recognize the issues that Dave was bringing up about the challenges we face. But, I've seen societies where at one time you would never see the women. They would be inside somewhere in the house, gradually changing to them peeping from behind curtains, to the youngsters coming and serving tea, their clothes changing from the conventional sari to trousers and shirts, and then gradually the family being a part of the conversation when people like me were visiting their house. So I've seen that change happening over time in many, many societies. One very big change that we've had the opportunity to observe in villages where we've enabled livelihoods for women, after overcoming all the challenges with the men that they've mentioned, we've seen people going from what is referred to as parda, that is where you hide, you keep your face covered all the time, going from there to becoming the administrative head of the village through a program which was called Integrated Watershed Development, and included a large aspect of building small businesses led by women entrepreneurs. So these changes are happening, and they're happening at scale. Even as development happens, per capita income increases, education levels rise. One last thing I want to leave with you is, we did a project that lasted 5 to 7 years, and we did a film right at the beginning, looking for aspirations and problems. So one child said that I want to become a doctor. Immediately the parents responded that, she can't become a doctor, it is expensive, education, this, that, and the other. 5 years later, we were filming the stories of how lives had changed. And a girl from the same family said that I want to become a police person. And immediately the parents jumped in and said, yes, we are going to help. We are looking for how to help the girl go to higher education and so on. It was such a huge change in that one family. And it represented the change that had happened over 5 or 7 years in those villages that we had the privilege to work in. So these changes are happening now. So even as we're talking about challenges, it's important to recognize that there is a lot of change happening, which is enabling much better inclusion, much better equity, and much better diversity of representation.
Thank you. And that's a great story and a great point. Elliot, I don't want to put you on the spot, but since you are the supreme, I think, storyteller in this group, I know that you have created amazing films, videos that are focusing on the essence of diversity and then how people are rising to the challenge. Can you briefly share any one of your favorite, perhaps, films that you have created?
Yeah, just thanks, Carol. Just in terms of intentionality, right? I think it's so important to be intentional, both in front of and behind the camera of the stories we're telling, but also who's telling those stories. And the best example that I have of that from our recent experience in the last year is that COVID did catalyze some opportunities for us, right? When we're telling stories around the world, for example, we have a project at the moment which is called For Tomorrow. It's a collaboration between the motor group Hyundai and the United Nations Development Program. The feature documentary about it is available on Amazon Prime. But it's about grassroots innovation. It's about people who are solving problems on a local level because they have the knowledge of that problem at a local level. And they may be using local knowledge to solve those problems, but the application for them is global because other people are experiencing the same thing elsewhere. Now, in terms of what you would normally see from a production company is that they would assemble a team from somewhere, i.e. America, and then send, or Australia or the UK, etc., and send that team around the world to capture those stories. Now, what we were able to do during COVID was to identify and empower diverse crews, local crews in each of those places, relevant crews, and establish them as the local repositories of that expertise and enable them to tell those stories. And what I loved about that is that it creates a systemic approach that serves the film at that time, but it also honors the establishing of communities where people can rely upon each other and continue to tell each other's stories going forward. So you don't know, by enhancing those networks at a local level, you're leaving a legacy that's far greater than the specific project at hand. And we're in the privileged position that we get to think about diversity on the opportunity spectrum rather than as a cost center, because we're so focused on it as a center for innovation, as a tool for innovation, because great ideas can come from anywhere, regardless of education, right? So we love that expansive definition of diversity too. That is, I think it was someone who was not diverse as a person, Malcolm Forbes from the Forbes family, but said that diversity is the art or the act of thinking independently together. So it's bringing all those experiences to the table, uncovering them, treating them like the gemstones that they are. And so I think if you empower that as a philosophy throughout an organization, that diversity is something to be unlocked, a gemstone to be polished, something to be found and discovered, then everyone's on the lookout for that element. And so it becomes an opportunity to reveal something, and a bit of it's like a challenge, a game, but it's something that's really nice to unlock and benefit from. And so we love to think about that in terms of diversity's absolute impact on innovation of ideas, of thoughts, of progress, stemming from all of our individual experiences and where we each come from on a daily basis.
Thank you so much. And I don't know if any of you know about P&G has this new initiative called Widen the Screen. And towards what Elliot's saying is that they are actually funding diverse creatives, filmmakers who don't get the opportunity truly to be funded for short films, longer films and such. And then so they are funding creatives, widening the screen, but then also the people who are on camera, whether they're in their ads or whether they're in their documentaries, are very, very diverse. And that's something that they are continuing to invest a lot of time in. How about other stories? I love getting specific. We're talking incredibly at a high level, but then when, Elliot or Anavan talks about this is something specific that we're doing, any other specific?
I'm happy to share two stories, Carol, quickly. One is about young woman called Sai Sushmita. She comes from this district called Kadapa in central part of India, Andhra Pradesh. And her story is that is reflective of quite a lot of young women in rural India. She aspires to do well in her studies. Her family managed to get her enrolled in a college where she has to go and stay away from her family to study. It's a government college, a rural college. And much like a lot of women, millions of them across the country, she will never usually find a path to enter into a job or a career where her income levels are better than her previous generation. How do we know Sai Sushmita? She was part of one of our programs called our Youth Employment Program, where we work with marginalized students through colleges and non-governmental organizations, non-profit organizations across India. So here was this firebrand of this young woman who participated in the program, gained skills and knowledge. And not only did she ace the interviews in many companies, she chose to join TCS. And then after joining TCS, the traditional path would be that of a techie. But she said, I want my story to be that of other women in my district, in my state, and the rest of India. And so she took it upon herself to explore opportunities within our CSR team. And she is now part of the youth employment program and supporting the similar efforts for others who are marginalized across India. I wanted to share this story because ultimately it is the power of the person that really makes a difference in any effort that we do. The second story I want to share quickly is that of Tabassum. I met her about 10 days ago in one of the places that Anirban was talking about, marginalized rural India, a place called Latehar. In fact, I met 32 young Dalit women who are entrepreneurs who have been working with us in the last 3 years as part of our Bridge IT entrepreneurship program. What is special about Tabassum? Her husband was a daily wage worker, so work was not very, it was very seasonal, okay? She started in the program because our teams went, identified her, the village leader said she has some potential, we spoke to the family, our partners, and then she started to be part of the program of digital entrepreneurship. Now, fast forward 2 years, she has 2 shops in her village, one to provide citizen entitlements to villages and another to provide other digital services. She has a 1-year-old kid. And the story of usually Dalit women, marginalized women in India in a rural village who are of that age group and married is that of, taking care of family and being a homemaker. But here she is, a business owner, earning 3 to 4 times the average income that somebody would earn in the village. The best part of it is, you know what? She has employed her husband to work in her business.
Great.
So again, a story of hope that, ultimately empowerment is about giving people the path and celebrating them when they are succeeding in being able to take it. And I think that's reflective within our organizations also.
Super, thank you so much. And yes, these amazing diverse programs in community then helps to train diverse talent that can apply for, which I think it's a brilliant way to, again, attract. I think, Philip, you're saying, like, where are we finding these individuals? Mm-hmm. So any other stories? Because we love storytelling because it really sticks.
Karen, I just want to come in maybe and put another, a thought for everyone.
Absolutely.
Forward. And I think, on one hand, we talk about CSR, which is a lot of the community programs which Balaji and Ban and they were talking about. And then on the other hand, we talk about DE&I, which is also about, corporates and internal employees and that kind of thing, right? ESG today has come up. So this has been a big alphabet soup, and of course with the SDGs, right? So we have this whole alphabet soup. But I think with ESG, we've been able to bridge that gap because even Dave said, I feel like an outsider. But it's not, right? It is not, because all parts of these pieces come together when you talk about ESG. So some of those examples showing that bridging that ESG does between D&I on one hand with business and CSR with communities, it would really help also. So just a thought.
No, that's a great point. So thank you. Other stories, and yes, we all agree it's alphabet soup. And what I always say is that understand what are the objectives that you're trying to accomplish, who are the audiences you want to reach in order of priority, and then figure out, don't get stuck in there's just too many words, for sure, acronyms and such. But any other stories that people want to share?
I could share a couple quick ones, and Karen, it builds on your as well about looking at this through the lens of ESG, but specifically to the D&I. So the first one is very quickly one of our clients, which is Comcast, NBC Universal, who actually has quite a commitment to thinking about their overall ESG, but social impact. And it's under now this umbrella called Project UP, and UP stands for Unlimited Potential. And so we talk, Balaji, you were talking a lot about empowerment. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the work that they do with their commitment, so they've got targets and such internally around their D&I, but they really externalize it and live it with their community partners. And so they are not just obviously providing funding, but really helping and supporting the capacity, whether that is actually creating space because they are obviously a cable provider, so they can actually provide space for those stories to get out, to how they actually bring together and convene different experts with these experts in the field to really advance their work, to bringing in opportunities for them to really think about how to measure what they're doing in a more effective way. But they're real partners where they bring an empowerment lens and approach. So they're taking what's internal to the organization, the commitments, and they're externalizing it through the way in which they do partnership. So I appreciate that, because oftentimes, the inside and the outside have to align. And when you can truly walk the walk on it, it's much more powerful. The second example is a client, it's a Canadian example. So the retailer won't be known to probably most or all of you, but they're a big retailer called The Bay. They sell clothing, they sell all kinds of things. We worked with them to kind of define their overarching social impact approach. And they were looking for a big idea. And ultimately, about Canada, the history of Canada, we have a very poor history as it relates to Indigenous peoples. And the Hudson's Bay was actually created before the origination of Canada. And so they are intertwined with the terrible treatment of Indigenous peoples. And so when they asked us to think about their social impact efforts, we said there's probably no bigger thing you could do than reconcile your past with Indigenous. And so they went down that path. We've created a platform called Charter for Change. As it relates to DE&I, what it's done is it's starting to transform the organization from within. So reconciliation is a big movement within Canada for Indigenous peoples, and they're starting to truly walk the walk and looking at their practices, looking at their hiring practices, looking at the level of from managers all the way up to the C-suite in terms of what their diversity and equity and inclusion practices look like. But when we start to externalize and you start thinking about things like the 15% pledge, how do you put more products on the shelves that come from Indigenous business owners? How do you, people of color, how do you put those on the shelves? How do you walk the walk again from the internal to the external? They're on a long journey. They have made lots of mistakes along the way. But when I talked at the beginning about courage, sometimes it's about really taking that step about doing what you believe is right because you have a vested interest to solve a problem, often because you've helped create that problem or contributed to that problem, and then really start to live it and to acknowledge you've got a long path ahead of you. And so those two examples to me are inspiring because it's people trying to actually really live their D&I commitments, but doing it in a way where they recognize it's a long, long path and they're not going to get it all right, but that doesn't deter them from still doing it.
Great, thank you. Those are great examples. Anybody else have any positive examples? Because we're also going to get to some failures, because failing you learn a lot in. But any more positive examples anybody wants to jump in on?
Carol, I've got one more I can bring in that sits really at the intersection of people, planet, and purpose. That for many years we worked with the World Cocoa Initiative. And for those of you who are familiar with the cocoa supply chain, it is a very complex supply chain. We were working with some of the leading chocolate companies in the US and globally, and the connection to the farms that were primarily at that time based in Africa. And what the companies were realizing is that the family farms were going out of business. And so as they started to dig into why, they realized that many of those family farms, because of climate change, was making it difficult to grow cocoa. The cocoa bod, it is a very complicated agricultural item to grow. And so families were moving, especially the young people in those families, were moving to grow rubber instead. And as they dug in further, they understood, and something truly that cocoa companies always knew, that the majority of cocoa farmers have never tasted a piece of chocolate. They make typically about $1 a day, if that. It's a very laborious and difficult job. And so the cocoa companies decided to put competition aside and said, what would happen if we collaborated and looked at the highest level of the supply chain and the roots of the supply chain, realizing that we can't be anything if we aren't investing in the inception of the supply chain. And so they launched something called Cocoa Action in 2017 that was really designed to challenge how cocoa companies work together, support and invest in the inception of the supply chain to then support the entire supply chain across the way. It was really a wonderful example of how companies could set profit aside, and ultimately that profit came back around to them. But along the way, every step of that chain profited as well.
Super. Thank you so much for that story. I'd love to ask you all with your wisdom, and also let me give you a time check. We will let you go at 10:30, but if you want to go to 11, we can do that. So you have the opportunity. It's a great conversation, but I also want to be respectful of your time. So that's just the time check. Right now, we've got about 15 minutes left to the bottom of the hour, but we can then go to the top of the hour if you want. I would love to know, how do you educate? How do you, if you don't have a CEO or a C-suite that truly understands the power of DE&I, you know, maybe they're leaning in, maybe they understand, maybe they've seen the Deloitte, the McKinsey, all that great background. Maybe their competitors are doing a better job. Do you have any insights, or dare I say secrets, to move along their knowledge so that they will embrace DEI not as a check the box exercise, but as truly embedding it deeply into culture for business benefit as well as societal benefit?
Yeah, Carol, I'll chime in. I think it's a matter of understanding what are the barriers for that client. But I think for most businesses, the business case has been proven. But if they don't understand that, there's reams of data and case studies from McKinsey, BCG, very notable management consulting firms demonstrating that diverse companies' leadership yield greater profitability, ROI, better decision-making, better innovation, products and services, better quality products and services. So the business case has been proven. I think it's a matter then, if they don't have an appreciation of that, articulating that case to bring them around, and then to also talk about others, which we've been touching. It leads to better talent acquisition, organizational growth, better overall performance. So the proof is there. We have history of companies succeeding with more diverse, equitable, and inclusive practices.
Okay. How about working with others? Can chime in, but also how about working with boards? Because, you know, how much have boards truly been pushing their companies to be much more inclusive and diverse for operational excellence and then for greater profitability? Any insights in that area?
I would say, Carol, both from a board and leadership perspective, I think in today's world, the challenge is not about getting whether this is right to do or not. It is about, going beyond that and experiencing it and living it, right? See, we talk about attention deficit in terms of the kind of things that we are bombarded with every day as people, and think about the situation of somebody who is in a C-suite, who is the executive leading an organization or a board member, the kind of things that they are bombarded with is much more. I think staying the course, so not only taking it not just as a checkbox, but something to do for the organization is the first step, but recognizing that this is a long-term effort that you need to stay committed to and invested in, and be ready to bear the fruits of it in other forms in the short term, while seeing the true, as John said, the meaning of why you're doing and why it matters play out in the long term. I think that kind of muscle that you have to build as an executive is something that comes with coaching and experience, right? As I mentioned, I think the goalpost will keep moving. So first thing to know is that you cannot just set targets or goals and say that you achieved it and it's great, because the goalposts are going to keep moving. So how are you going to keep evolving your own understanding of what those terms, whichever terms you use in the alphabet soup, if it is DE&I from an internal perspective, ESG from an external perspective, societal uplift, whatever you call it, right? Understanding that, making sense of that, and knowing that you need to put long-term plans in place and commitments in place for the company and your customers and your community. I think that's easier said than done. The second thing I would say there is, it is an isolated space as a leader to be able to talk within closed rooms and share failures and what has not worked. I think having an opportunity in elite forums where CEOs and board members can openly discuss. Board members have the luxury, I would say, of maybe seeing more than one organization. Some serve on multiple boards, right? But the executives who are running companies often are in an isolated space. They surround themselves with people who give different viewpoints. But can they talk to their peers and be able to understand what they are doing? And that's where I think being in a B2B kind of setup like TCS, it's helped us a lot, because we have absorbed a lot of, over the last 50 years, we have absorbed a lot of what our clients represent in the communities where they live and work, and how we can reflect that in who we are without diluting our own sense of purpose and identity. And I would say that has been the balance to strike. I wouldn't say we've been successful all the time, but I think this is not a zero-sum game, right? If you're making progress, and if you're able to show results, and if you stay committed, and if you are really doing it for the right reasons, you will start to see that it matters, it changes, and you will become better informed as a leader, and that will start to reflect on your immediate next levels and the rest of the company.
Super. I'm glad you brought that up, because in the United States, there's a group called CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. It was started 5 years ago by PwC, P&G, Accenture, KPMG, New York Life, and some others. It was about a dozen. Today, it's 2,400 CEOs that have signed a pledge. And the pledge, it's not just that we will be diverse. They also have extensive sharing of ideas, best practices. They talk about failures. They have unconscious bias training. And they also give each other insights and support on board engagement. So I love the fact that that's in the US, but I question, where is the one that's global? And, you know, maybe there's one that you might know about, or maybe that's an opportunity for a, you know, Tata or another group to create a global CEO action. So just a thought. Others want to join in on, again, I'm really trying to get to specific ideas of how companies are performing in DE&I, your best practices, others, or failures. So anybody want to jump in on this?
Can I just add one, just to build on what Balaji was saying, just to add one quick point,
Sure.
which is, and we're seeing, and I think we're all seeing this may be more in the North American context, but you were asking about boards. There needs to be, and we're starting to see this with companies, tying executive compensation to measurable outcomes, right? And so when you tie the KPIs, like everything else, like every executive is, their compensation has all kinds of, key performance indicators that they have to hit. The companies who are most serious about it and the boards that are asking for it and demanding it, where they're saying, if you're really serious about our DE&I efforts or DE&I and belonging efforts, and actually tying that to the compensation, you're seeing way quicker advancement on those commitments than you are on those who have made the commitment but aren't actually walking the walk. And so I really think it's important in this conversation that we tie executive and just not even executive, but compensation to outcomes, or it's easy to make a commitment and then not follow through until you get called out on it.
But I think it's important what those outcomes are, right? So I think there has been some criticism that we are tying compensation and then the executives kind of retrospectively tie it back to things that they had already done. So I do think it's important, to hold them accountable a little bit, whether that's the board or whoever is, understanding that it's not just we're going to use this as an excuse to raise, what we were already going to do, but it's actually, creating some measurable change.
And I want to give a very specific example, Philip, to that point, that Mars, when they finally got privately held, each business had a purpose, but the company didn't have a purpose. And they got together and they really spent a lot of time trying to determine it. Their purpose, which I think is extraordinary, is the world we want tomorrow is how we do business today. The world we want tomorrow is, it's broad enough umbrella for all their businesses, but then they immediately tied, to your point, the compensation of their top 200 executives to how they are bringing that to life. So that's a great example. Other best, go ahead.
I just wanted to, I remembered a couple of examples.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I've done in my businesses is, the simple idea of how to get more women into my workforce, right? So the usual stuff is HR, finance, marketing. So as the organization was growing, this is the renewables side of the business. We spoke to the recruitment consultants and said that when you go to these tier 2 engineering institutes, ask for women in things like engineering design, right? So we've got a large design team because, we do about 30, 40 projects a year. And, surprises, we got a lot of people, a lot of women. Then we said, let's extend this to legal as well. Let's see if we can. And now 70% of the team is women. So those are amazing examples of very quick success of getting women into our workforce. I just remember that.
Let me build on that for a second, because there's a policy, Deloitte's done it and others, called blind recruiting. And what companies who are leaders are doing, they're taking names, education, and addresses off of resumes, so that it is more of a nuanced, neutral review. And that has helped a lot with women, especially in technology jobs. So I wanted to recognize that as a build on what you said, Dave. Yeah.
So in India, what happens is the moment you talk about manufacturing company and a project company going to different locations, women desist from joining. So they just don't want to go out of the metro towns and cities. So we then have to push and tell them that we will do this in Bombay, Bangalore, Pune, and you will travel escorted, but you have to travel. And we have done these experiments, like the escorted travel, right? They find buddies, so you have to find a buddy, and then you go travel to locations with the buddy. So these kind of things is, I don't want to get into details, but it works. So then the women are, confident, they go, then they address issues at the workplace, which is like, the sites are some 200 miles away from a city, and then you have to drive for 6 hours to get there, all this stuff. So, but they're doing all of it, which is amazing.
But they're taking, to your point, a systems approach to what else do we have to bring to the party to support this person in their life, so that they can get to our companies and such and be supported. And I think that's a brilliant way to do it. I want to mention that in the United States, there is this new movement called open hiring. And the question was, how do we get different types of people into our companies? And there's a little tiny company called Grayston Bakery in Yonkers. And what they do, and this is a 40-year-old practice, is that if anyone's on the street, they can be destitute, they can be homeless or whatever. They just say, sign onto our list with your name and some phone number. No resume, no interview and such, just show up. And this has been extraordinary to provide, to give back dignity, pride, and hope to men and women, especially people of color. It's been very, very successful for Graceman. And now there is a movement. So if any of you are interested, Joe Kenner is the CEO of Grayson. You can use Kenner. You can go to him, connect via LinkedIn. And you've got Body Shop, IKEA, and other companies beginning to embrace this because they need, there's over 10 million people in our country that want to work, but no one will give them the opportunities. They might have a bad record. They might have been in jail and such. And so it's an amazing opportunity. And if 40,000 additional people were on payrolls, that would return a $3 billion impact. So again, what we're talking about here are, blind recruiting, open hiring, Dave, which you talked about, which is ecosystems around women to truly protect them so that they can advance both intellectually as well as with physical safety. So I just wanted to share this because we want to give our listeners ideas. Yes, Deb.
Sorry, one small interesting thing I wanted to share. For all the success that we see, there is a very large number of failures, right? People who, in India, for instance, people who struggle to get into this competitive exams. For instance, people struggle for 5 years to get into the police force or the army or the administrative services. And after that, they are spent. Literally, they just don't know what to do if they're not. And that is about 80% of the people who have attempted, right? So we are starting an experiment that the criteria for people coming into this training program, and the training program will be identifying what is their propensity, what they really interested in doing, what they can be helped with, and we will find a path for them to pick up that skill and go and practice it either at the workplace or to an entrepreneurship. And what's the criteria for recruiting these people into the program? They should have failed.
Okay, good.
If they've failed in exams, they failed in their attempts or whatever they've been trying to do, that's the only criteria for them to enter this program. And it's free. But they get an environment where they're enabled, they're helped, and we don't force them to do any vocation or anything like that. The only attempt is to find out what is their propensity.
Great.
What will they stick with? What will they try and do actually, and help them through it.
Does that have a name for that type of opportunity? Is there a name? Is it branded in some way?
So it is being done in Pune at this point in time. This program is called the Lighthouse Program.
There you go, the Lighthouse Program. Great. I love that. Okay. So I want to be respectful for people's time. If you need to leave, before you leave, I want you to give some sort of just, end comment, something that you really want to bring all this together. But if you want to stay, we'll continue for another 29 minutes. So it's up to you. This has been a brilliant conversation. So just keep it coming.
Carol, I'm sorry, I do need to go. Ending thoughts, it's just been so inspiring to hear everybody talk in different perspectives. So thank you for including me.
Super, thank you. And that's Pia Garcia. She's the CEO of Ocula, based in New York.
Likewise, Carol, I would just want to end by saying it's been such a pleasure learning and hearing everybody, learning from each other. My parting comment is that we are all born with equal potential, but not equal opportunity.
Yep.
And we are dedicating our lives to how to create access to that opportunity. As people in power, in positions where we can create huge influence, my call to action is that we democratize that opportunity so that we not just think about those who are closest to opportunity, but those who are the farthest, and how we can include them to be part of this journey so that 20, 30, 50 years from now, the problems that we deal with as a world is very different from what we deal with today. Thank you. Thanks for including me.
Thank you, Balaji. That was just brilliant. Beautifully stated. Thank you so much.
Carol got to go as well.
Okay.
Carol, I've got to go as well. And I do want to give you an example of how diversity is increasing in the workplace before I leave. I just want to add sustainability to the list of functions that Dave mentioned. I
Right.
can't tell you the number of calls I've got saying they're looking for a head for sustainability. Would you like to apply? But they're looking for a woman. So sustainability is becoming a preferred place to hire people from the female gender.
I love that, and I'm hearing a lot about that, especially in the States. A friend of mine, just Pam Alabaster, just went into J&J to their new spinoff, Kenvue, which is all their consumer products, as global head of sustainability. And you're right, that is a global point of view on all the different areas in sustainability is very much needed. So if there are any college-bound, graduate school students bound, or just you got to roll up your sleeves and get the experience. So thank you, Anirban. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Others that want to, and Eddie, we haven't heard that much from you, but we would love for you to weigh in on any of, you have like a story to tell regarding DE&I working really well or a fail.
Thank you, Carol. I'm actually also about to leave you to it as I have another meeting, but I actually wanted to share a really impactful and practical approach to working with leaders and organizations. You asked the question about educating and maybe getting through to leaders who might not be there yet with the buy-in and the personal connection to diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And this, I must admit, this is not mine. This has been relayed to me by a colleague who tried this. And, I think someone mentioned today that everybody is intersectional. Mm-hmm. And the situation there was a leader in a higher education organization who had DE&I boxes to check, so they had a DE&I leader come in and join the organization. That was my colleague. But the person coming from a privileged background did not believe that this agenda affected them personally in any sort of way. And I think many of us have seen this happen when leadership thinks, we do have compliance requirements, we do have some boxes to check, we might have some KPIs, but really it's, for those people who are affected, and this is not for me. And what my colleague did was actually, in her first encounter with that person and knowing what was about to happen, she took a very different angle, and she talked about that person's intersectionality and that person's unique of attributes that made them different from other people that worked in the workplace. And that got through quite effectively. The person was able to kind of shift the lens and say, oh, actually, I do have a lived experience that's also different from others in a way, and I'm also being included, and I'm also being given a safe space in this organization. So maybe it makes sense to make that part of the core values rather than just boxes to check. So that was a little success story.
Super. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your contribution. Caleb, do you want to add?
Yeah, I've got to take off as well, but I'm glad that Dita was just sharing that story, because one of the things that I wanted to leave everyone with was just, we can't think of this as something that someone else's responsibility. Like, this is, we have to have the engagement of the full organization, of the leadership, down to each individual contributor, which means that DEI and conversations around justice and inclusion have to be something that isn't someone else's responsibility. It's our responsibility. No matter where we are in the organization, we need to be training people, we need to be educating them, we need to be showing them how they can make a difference in this area as well, no matter who they are. So that's how I would, leave in terms of what my call to action would be. Appreciate everyone. Love this conversation. Love the global perspective. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. And Carrie put a wonderful comment in the chat, which is, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And I think that what we're all trying to do is to really reach the greatest and potential of people. And, you know, I always like to say, add miracle grow to it so people can blossom and bloom and do so well for themselves and their organizations as well as society. I think we're going to be winding down. So we've got a few diehards here. Deborah, you want to join in and say something?
I just wanted to say thank you very much. It's been a terrific conversation. And as a closing word, I think training is absolutely essential at all levels. And thank you so much for bringing up open hiring. I've been involved, and client Grayson has been a client. Part of that model is training. So I think we need to train people at all levels in this area. And a lot of that are these new models: open hiring, inclusive hiring.
That's
and
beautiful.
New paradigms. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you, Carol.
Well,
thank you all.
Thank you. We've got, you know, Elliot, Carrie, and John. Just, you know, final comment. And Elliot, you know, again, I think that people need to understand that video storytelling, telling films, the emotion of it is probably the most powerful way to truly, you know, move DE&I forward. But any final comments, Elliot?
Yeah, just that everything should be embodied and engendered. Like, I think that message of in front of and behind the screen is just as important for companies that are selling consumer products, because you've got to represent the communities that you're serving. And I think that just stems back to why companies with purpose do better, is because they create better engagement with their employees because they feel fully represented. They create better culture because there's psychological safety, because people can turn up as their authentic selves to work, and because they know that they're represented fully. It creates resilience because you know your stakeholders up and down the supply chain represent the people that you're serving. And so there's just automatic more buy-in. And when you have more buy-in, you can have greater visions. You can have better agility as a business. It just comes back to being a more purposeful and more purpose-oriented company. And just like DEI, I never really, maybe it's a good first step to hire a DEI officer, but inevitably at some stage it should be like design. It should be embedded across departments. It shouldn't be its own thing isolated that's easy to add and drop whenever money gets tight. It's just an outlook and an embodiment that people need to have. And just like design schools that are smart, like at the University of Texas in Austin, where they're putting the design school across different disciplines, so it doesn't sit as its own vertical, as its own department. It really sits and interconnects with each of the departments and each of the faculties across campus. DEI is similar. It should come from within, and it should be present in any of these decisions, and it just makes the world richer, our decisions better, more informed. And again, like, it's not a cost center. It's an opportunity to recognize the greatest of ideas, and represent that we need to know what people are thinking from all different walks of life. And it's as much who you walk in today with the experiences you had this morning, the experiences you had last year, the experiences you had as a child, the opportunities you were given, the ethnicity you come from, the ethnography, the gender. It's all of that we're bringing to work everywhere. And the globalization that we see and our interconnectedness just demands that of everyone, that we have that respect for each other. Easier said than done, of course, but the more we just live it and exhibit it, and stop necessarily over talking about it, but just the doing it. To Lawrence's point, the say do gap has always been a problem, but sometimes we need to talk it out until it just becomes something that was just accepted.
Super, thank you so much. Brilliantly stated. John, Carrie, I'm going to let you be the follow, the last one. John, you make a comment before we go?
Yeah, I'd say this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate being a part of it. And I feel really lucky to see so many people engaging in this with such conviction. And I guess the only thing I would add is that it's important for these issues for all of us to act with urgency, but also to maintain patience. The change takes a long time, and not to get despondent if we don't see the change happening as fast as we'd like, but to continue to act with urgency at the same time. So it's a balancing act, I think, and I've been impressed with the people I've seen here today.
Super, thank you so much. Karen, I'm going to let you be the end. Karen.
Karen, before we have the final word from Carrie, could I just make one more request? Because, you know, we didn't, there was just so much of discussion happening that we didn't really get to the collaboration piece. And I'm just hoping, because John just mentioned, you know, act and then, of course, you know, wait to make something happen. So I think one of the things we definitely must look at is what are the collaboration opportunities? And perhaps, you know, it would be something as a follow-up to this roundtable, but definitely should be thinking on that. And of course, if Carrie would touch on a little bit of what are those kind of issues we could do, I want to make sure I get at least one person to say it. So yeah, thank you so much.
Carrie, clean up.
Okay, I'm happy to take that. Well, I will pick right up on that, because I think what we need less of is silos. We have enough like-minded people working together. What we need is more integrated systems. And that will feel uncomfortable until we realize the true value of an integrated system, right? So I said something in the chat earlier, and I'll just bring it up because I think it's a nice closing, that advancing equity, inclusion, and belonging is bigger than what business can address. Systems are deeply rooted in our societies, and disruption is both urgent and requires a commitment to the long term. So 100%, John, to what you said. However, business can model systems that reverberate in society. So Karen, the point on collaboration, if we are using business as a tool to challenge and display what DEIB can look like in its best iteration, I truly believe that will iterate into what our societies look like too.
And I love, Carrie, that you say DENINB, because belonging is so important. So I want to thank all of our terrific panelists, those who are here to the bitter end and those that have had to leave. Karen, thank you for this wonderful opportunity, both for my keynote and for moderating this discussion. We're going to take some of these brilliant comments. We're going to put them into some follow-up. So please, anyone listening, look out for that. And of course, reach out to any of our panelists, reach out to me, reach out to Rise with additional thoughts and such. I also want to challenge, because we talked about groups, and Karen, you talked about groups coming together. The CEO Action, again, that has 2,400 CEOs. It's only in the US and a little bit in Canada. It is not global. And so it's surprising that someone hasn't taken the lead. So perhaps the challenge to listeners, and maybe our very large companies that joined us, like Mahindra and Gila and Tata, that maybe they will be the one to set up a collaboration for DE&I to share best practices and learnings.
That would be an amazing outcome for us from this roundtable if we can have that, because that's exactly what we want to do. And hopefully, yes, we shall follow up on this. Thank you so much, Carol, for doing such a great session for all of us and bringing these incredible minds around that table. It has been just unbelievable.
Well, thank you for the Rise Summit. It is extraordinary. It's no PowerPoint. It's, you know, it's like truly ideas and sharing ideas, and also the attendees and the conference participants are about action, and we have to take action. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye.